Bienvenidos. I'm working on a short story. It's about a retired midwife turned gardener turned storyteller, and it involves two brothers who are estranged. This first piece is called The Storyteller. It was early October, and Doña Luz's garden had been harvested. She had shared her abundance of tomatoes, zucchini, and corn with friends and neighbors. She knew by experience that some of them would return the favor by sending jars of homemade salsa or dishes of their own versions of calabacitas, zucchini with onion and corn. Some would add tomatoes, salsa, and cheese. Now that her garden would be fallow till spring, Doña Luz had decided she wanted to connect with young children again. She loved their innocence, their inquisitive nature, and it was her hope, too, that her stories would connect them to a different time. It was easy to get permission from a few parents, most of whom she had brought into the world. Once a week, on early Saturday evenings, Doña Luz would heat up her caldo de pollo and rest a bit before the children arrived from their nearby houses. Doña Luz commanded silence before her storytelling. No teasing, no coughing, no scratching of itchy scabs on elbows or knees. She peered at each of them, one by one, to ensure she had their complete attention. They learned early on to wash the dirt off their hands and faces from playing outside, to ask their mothers if they could stay out later that night, even though they all lived next door to each other or across the street, to pee before leaving the house. The four of them gathered on the front porch at the foot of Doña Luz's heavy cushioned rocker at precisely 7 o'clock to hear her cuentos. At age 6, Adelina was the youngest and the smallest, so they called her Pee-wee. Her cousin Camel, age 10, was the oldest. Everyone called him that because of his small forehead. Zombie could shut you out, not blink an eyelash, and pretend you weren't even there. As for Rags, his clothes always looked like they were falling apart. Silence, and then a nod. Doña Luz was ready to begin. These are stories that I grew up with, mijitos. True or not, no les puedo decir. Yo solo los comparto con ustedes. What I am about to tell you tonight is a story about love and violence. Oh, Doña Luz, interrupted Rags. How can love and violence go together? Does somebody get beat up? Zombie glared at Rags and rolled his eyes. Doña Luz, whined Camel. Make him go home. He always does that. And then he quickly pinched Rags on the arm. Let Doña tell her story. Doña Luz was silent for a moment, took a deep breath, and began again. Many, many years ago, before you were born, and even before your parents came to life, this town, as you know it, was much, much different. People lived simply, and most had enough to eat. There were vegetable gardens in the backyard, apple trees, peach and pear. There was water in the acequia, not like now. In the summer, the sun was fierce. The only time they could rest was at night, cuando era más fresquecito. It was not uncommon for people to sleep outside on mats or cots near their doors. Can we sleep outside tonight, Doña Luz? Asked Rags, proud of himself for his brave suggestion. Camel flicked a finger on the side of Rags' head. Rags pushed him back. Ignoring them both, Doña Luz continued. People had grown so accustomed to sleeping outside and to the safety of their families and neighbors that they paid little attention to their surroundings. And because you are not paying attention, this story will wait until next Saturday. Con el favor de Dios, I'll still be around. There were noises of disappointment, but Doña Luz was pleased. She had learned a thing or two about reading the book about 1001 Nights. This next piece is about, it's called Birthing Babies. It's when Doña Luz was younger and still being a midwife. Layer upon layer of snow fell on the ground. It had been snowing for 2 days. The sun was up, but snow continued to drift and swirl. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the roads were packed down smooth like sunken railroad tracks, each car following in the tire tracks of the one ahead. There was little traffic, so the few cars on the road accelerated slowly, drivers not wanting to skid into one another or onto the 3-foot-high embankment. Mufflers exhaled cloud-like fumes. After clearing her driveway, Doña Luz sat in her idling car for several minutes. She had been called for another delivery, and although she was bundled up, her hands were the last to feel the warmth, even through fur-lined leather gloves. She had been delivering babies for 10 years. Most births were normal, but occasionally there were complications. A complication this morning would be the weather. Fortunately, she knew how to drive in the snow. With the car warmed up, Luz began her drive through town to get to the Valdez home. This would be Mrs. Valdez's 5th child and her last. She promised that, but she had said that when the 3rd child was born. Doña Luz smiled as she thought of the Valdez children, happy, healthy, and strong. Suddenly, a car bumped into the back of hers, driving her into the embankment. The young driver was unhurt and bolted out of his car. This caused him to slip and slide right up to Doña Luz's door. "Oh, you're all right? I'm sorry. What can I do? Can I get you something?" "What you can do, young man, is to stop talking right now. I need to catch my breath." Doña Luz, white-knuckled, held on to the steering wheel. "I think I'm okay. Help me get out of here. I have to get out of here. My car." The front wheels kept spinning as she gave it gas. There was no traction to get into reverse. The young driver nervously opened the trunk of his car. No shovel, nothing to dig her car out from the embankment. A flare. He had a flare. No, a jack, but her car didn't have a flat. Maybe he could use that turning thing to dig her out. It would have to do. He got on his knees, but using the lug wrench only created a hollow into the embankment. After 10 minutes of digging and wet knees and freezing red hands, he gave up. "I'm so stupid. My folks are going to kill me. Are you going to call the cops?" "I don't have time for the cops. See that blue truck that just pulled up? His name is Ralph. Hurry, run over there and ask for help." Ralph and the young man took turns shoveling snow away from the front of the car. They added traction under the tires, and finally Doña Luz was free. She had to remind herself to drive slowly because she was getting concerned about Mrs. Valdez, who didn't stay long in labor. By the time she arrived at the house and trudged her way up to the front porch, Mr. Valdez was already at the door, hands bloody. "Hurry, please. El bebé acaba de nacer ahorita mismo. No sé nada del ombligo." "It's going to be okay, Mr. Valdez. You go and get washed up. Maybe have a cup of coffee or something stronger," she said in the calmest voice she could muster. Doña Luz threw off her coat and gloves as she rushed into the bedroom. She rubbed Mrs. Valdez's arm and looked into her eyes. "Let's take care of your baby, okay? You and Mr. Valdez did just fine." From her bag, she pulled a bottle of rubbing alcohol for her hands and 2 clamps for the umbilical cord. The first clamp 3 inches from the baby, and the next one 2 inches from that. With a square of gauze, she grasped the remainder of the cord and cut between the clamps with her sharp scissors. Bendita sea Dios, your baby boy is healthy. I'm going to clean him up for you. An hour later, Mrs. Valdez was settled in a clean bed with her baby boy suckling at her breast, husband and children at her side. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you, Mrs. Valdez. But with my next delivery, I might be calling on Mr. Valdez for help. Doña Luz winked. This piece is about one of the brothers who is estranged, and it's called La Virgen. It was mid-September, not a hint of morning sun near the horizon. After a quick gulp of steaming coffee, Rocky threw on a plaid shirt over his faded blue jeans, slipped into his hiking boots, and grabbed his wool-lined jacket before heading out the door. There was a chill in the air, and it took a minute for his truck to warm up. Rubbing his hands together, he pushed the cold knob into first gear, then second, and onto the street next to the gas station where he lived and worked. Hardly a light in any of the houses he passed, not a car in sight as he drove 3 miles to Crystal Lake. The only sound, the humming of his tires once he was on the highway. Dark pine and golden scrub oak, the only sentinels along the road. Once at the lake, Rocky continued along the shoreline. He parked off-road past a small cove and headed beyond the pinon juniper woodland. A sandy footpath led him to several huge boulders. Almost a century ago, someone had carved a life-sized relief image of the Virgin Mary onto one of the sandstone boulders. In time, weather eroded her features, and any one of her followers would freshen up the blue paint of her cloak, white for her dress, and an expression of serenity on her face, which was the same color as the boulders. La Virgen, they called her, the same name for the place where she was revered. When someone asked, "¿A dónde vas?" it was if the answer was "A la Virgen," and not to the lake, then you understood they were on a spiritual quest. It was a place and hour of the day that Rocky treasured and marveled at, a timeless moment when dusk and dawn felt the same. As the sun appeared on the eastern horizon, Rocky removed a small triangular-shaped stone from his jacket pocket. It was wide at the top and angled downward to a rounded tip. He held the stone easily in his hand. It was light and smooth, made shiny by his handling of it for so many years. It was a touchstone for him, given to him by his mother, Martha. As a child, Rocky had often been afraid of the dark. Even when Tony was in the bed next to his, "Tony, I hear something," he would whisper. "It's nothing," Tony would answer, or "It's the wind," or "It's your imagination," or "Por favor, let me sleep." None of it worked. So in the end, Tony would tease him for being a fraidy cat. Finally, after endless nights of Rocky running to his parents' bed in the middle of the night, Martha tucked him in his own bed, took his hand in hers, and placed the triangular stone in his hand. "Verás, Hito, this is no ordinary stone. It is my heart, stronger than anything you might be afraid of. It contains all my love for you. Ahora, duerme con los angelitos. Siempre estoy contigo." Rocky knelt at the foot of La Virgen. "Give me strength, Virgencita. Mamá, dame fuerza para hablar con Tony." Thank you for listening.